One ordinary Saturday morning, I stepped onto my back porch expecting nothing more exciting than feeding the cattle before breakfast. Instead, I froze in disbelief. Beyond my fence came the sounds of children splashing, upbeat music echoing through outdoor speakers, and people cheering. I walked toward the edge of my property, convinced I had to be hearing things. Then I saw it. A massive resort-style swimming pool stretched across land that had belonged to my family for generations. Luxury lounge chairs lined the concrete deck, bright umbrellas shaded guests, and a brand-new diving board stood only a few yards from an old oak tree my grandfather planted decades ago. The most unbelievable part wasn't the pool itself. It was the woman standing proudly beside it. The HOA president smiled as if she had personally built a paradise for the entire neighborhood. She looked directly at me, raised her hand in a friendly wave, and shouted, "Beautiful, isn't it?" At that moment, she had no idea that her dream project had been built on the wrong property. She also couldn't imagine that before this battle ended, something far less glamorous than a luxury swimming pool would be sitting just 5 feet away from her prized diving board. My name is Jack Morrison, and until this unbelievable dispute began, I lived a peaceful life on Morrison Farm, just outside the growing community of Cedar Ridge. My grandparents purchased the property shortly after World War II. Back then, the area was almost entirely farmland, with wide-open fields stretching for miles. Over the years, developers slowly transformed the surrounding countryside into upscale neighborhoods filled with expensive homes, decorative landscaping, and perfectly maintained streets. Eventually, Cedar Ridge Estates surrounded 3 sides of our farm, but one thing never changed. Our land was never part of the homeowners association. The subdivision had been built decades after my grandparents recorded their deed. Every property document, every survey, and every county record confirmed that Morrison Farm stood completely independent of the HOA. While many of my neighbors spent weekends discussing landscaping rules or mailbox designs, my wife, Rebecca Morrison, and I preferred a much quieter life. Rebecca managed a respected veterinary clinic in town, while I cared for our cattle, repaired equipment, and maintained the family property that had been passed down through 3 generations. For years, we enjoyed a friendly relationship with most of the people living nearby. Then Linda Barrett became president of the HOA. From the day she took office, Linda made it clear that she wanted Cedar Ridge to become the most luxurious neighborhood in the county. She proposed expensive fountains, expanded walking trails, decorative gardens, outdoor entertainment spaces, and eventually a resort-style recreation center complete with a large swimming pool. There was only one problem. The HOA didn't actually own enough common land to build everything Linda envisioned. At first, none of it seemed like my concern. Then one afternoon, I noticed 2 survey trucks parked near the southern edge of my pasture. Curious, I drove over in my utility vehicle and greeted one of the surveyors. "What are you measuring?" I asked. The man glanced at his clipboard. "Future recreation expansion." I looked around before pointing toward the fence. "You sure you're standing on the right parcel?" He checked his paperwork again. "This should be parcel 17. I smiled politely. "No, this is Morrison Farm." The survey crew exchanged uncertain looks before packing up their equipment and leaving less than 15 minutes later. I assumed someone had entered the wrong parcel number. Apparently, that wasn't the end of it. Within days, bright orange survey stakes appeared several feet inside my fence line. I removed every one of them. 2 mornings later, new stakes appeared in almost the exact same locations. Those disappeared too. Then someone spray-painted bright markings on several mature oak trees near the pasture. I painted over every mark before sunset. A week later, construction flags stretched nearly 200 feet across my grazing field. Once again, I removed them. Rebecca watched me loading the flags into the truck bed and laughed. "I think somebody really wants your attention. I think somebody doesn't know where the property line actually is." Rather than argue with strangers, I contacted the county assessor's office. After reviewing the property records, the employee spoke confidently. "Mr. Morrison, your boundary hasn't changed since the original deed was recorded. Then why does an HOA keep sending survey crews onto my land?" She paused. "I'd recommend requesting an official boundary verification." That sounded like the smartest solution. A few days later, 2 licensed surveyors spent nearly an entire day inspecting the property. They located every original iron marker, compared historic legal descriptions with modern GPS measurements, and carefully photographed each boundary. When they finished, their conclusion couldn't have been clearer. The existing fence followed the legal property line almost perfectly. Their report included maps, measurements, photographs, and signed certifications. I placed the documents in my office safe and assumed the misunderstanding had finally been resolved. I couldn't have been more wrong. About 2 months later, Rebecca and I celebrated our anniversary with a long-awaited road trip through Montana. Before leaving, I asked my longtime neighbor, Frank Dawson, to check on the cattle every evening. I secured the barns, locked the equipment shed, and believed everything back home would remain exactly as we left it. 8 days into our vacation, my phone suddenly received several delayed text messages after we reached an area with better service. The first message from Frank read only 6 words. "Jack, call me immediately." The second contained several blurry photographs. I opened the first image. Bulldozers, concrete trucks, excavators, construction fencing. My stomach tightened. The second photo showed something even worse. Half of my southern pasture had been cleared. The third image revealed freshly poured concrete forming the unmistakable outline of a giant swimming pool. Rebecca leaned closer. "What are we looking at?" I could barely answer. "They're building something on our property." I called Frank immediately. He answered before the first ring finished. "Jack, I've been trying to reach you for days." "What happened?" "They showed up with construction crews. I told them the land belonged to your family." "What did they say?" "They claimed the HOA purchased that section years ago. The foreman even carried survey papers and county permits." Rebecca looked at me without saying a word. We both knew our vacation had just ended. The drive home felt endless. Nearly 12 hours later, we turned onto our familiar county road. Even from a distance, I could see construction cranes towering above the trees. As we reached the driveway, my heart sank. The old pasture looked nothing like I remembered. My fence had disappeared. Fresh landscaping surrounded a nearly completed resort-style swimming pool. Decorative stone walkways connected rows of luxury lounge chairs. Imported palm trees stood beside the water despite the fact that winter temperatures here regularly dropped below freezing. I parked near the temporary entrance. Before I could take more than a few steps, a security guard blocked my path. "Residents only." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're standing on my property." He frowned. "This is the Cedar Ridge Community Recreation Center." I pointed toward an enormous maple tree behind him. "My grandfather planted that tree over 70 years ago." The guard spoke quietly into his radio. Less than 2 minutes later, Linda Barrett arrived in a golf cart wearing sunglasses and a perfectly pressed white polo embroidered with the HOA logo. She stepped out smiling as though greeting an old friend. "Welcome home, Jack. What exactly do you think you're doing?" She calmly folded her arms. "Improving our community. You tore down my fence. Our legal team confirmed this land belongs within the HOA recreation parcel." I almost laughed. "No legitimate survey says that." She lifted a thick folder. "We have updated documents. I have county certified surveys." She simply shrugged. "Perhaps your paperwork is outdated." Behind her, workers continued installing tile around the enormous pool as though nothing unusual was happening. Children gathered outside the temporary fence, excitedly watching the final stages of construction. Linda lowered her sunglasses and smiled again. "Our grand opening is scheduled for next month." I looked directly into her eyes. "You built this entire resort on the wrong property." Her smile never disappeared. "Then I suppose you'll have to prove it." The following morning, I woke up with one goal: find out exactly how Linda Barrett and the Cedar Ridge HOA managed to build a multi-million-dollar pool complex on land they didn't own. I didn't storm into HOA meetings. I didn't threaten anyone. I knew that emotional reactions were exactly what people like Linda expected. She wanted me angry and impatient because angry people make mistakes. Instead, I started collecting evidence. The first step was visiting the county recorder's office. I brought every document I had: my grandfather's original deed, the certified survey, tax records, and property maps. The clerk spent nearly an hour reviewing everything before looking at me with a concerned expression. "Mr. Morrison, something doesn't match." "What do you mean?" She turned her monitor toward me. "The HOA's recreation parcel was created from a different lot number. It should not include your property. So how did they get approval?" She clicked through several files. "That's the strange part. Their construction application includes a boundary survey that appears different from the official county records. I leaned closer. Different how? The survey shows your southern pasture as part of Cedar Ridge Estates. My stomach tightened. That's impossible. The clerk nodded. According to our records, it is. I requested copies of every document connected to the pool project. 3 days later, I had a thick folder sitting on my kitchen table. Rebecca and I spent hours reviewing everything. Then we found something strange. The survey submitted by the HOA was completed by a private company called Horizon Land Solutions. The date on the document was only 6 weeks old, but my grandfather's original survey from decades earlier showed something completely different. Rebecca looked at me. Jack, they didn't make a mistake. What are you thinking? They paid someone to create a new boundary. I didn't want to believe it. A misunderstanding was one thing. A deliberate attempt to take someone's property was something else entirely. The next morning, I contacted the survey company listed on the documents. A receptionist answered. I'm calling about a boundary survey completed for Cedar Ridge Estates. One moment. After several minutes, a man came on the phone. This is David Collins. Mr. Collins, I'm Jack Morrison. Your company completed a survey involving my property. There was silence. Your property? Yes. The Morrison farm parcel. Another pause. Then his voice changed. Mr. Morrison, I think there has been some confusion. I'd like to know how my land became part of an HOA recreation area. I cannot discuss client information. Did your company physically inspect the property? Another long silence. Finally, he answered carefully. Not personally. That one sentence told me everything. A professional boundary survey wasn't supposed to be created from someone's assumptions. It required measurements, verification, and proper field inspection. But Linda's entire pool project was built on a document created by someone who apparently never even stood on the land. That afternoon, I hired an attorney specializing in property disputes. Her name was Caroline Hayes, and after reviewing the evidence, she gave me a serious warning. Jack, this isn't just a disagreement with your HOA. What is it? Potentially a title and construction issue. They built a permanent structure on land they didn't legally control. Can they be forced to remove it? She looked through the documents. If we prove they knowingly used inaccurate information, the consequences could be significant. That was the first time I felt confident. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted accountability. Meanwhile, Linda continued acting like nothing was wrong. She announced the pool opening date on the HOA website. Large banners appeared around Cedar Ridge. Grand opening. The Cedar Ridge Aquatic Club, the community celebrated. Neighbors posted pictures online. People praised Linda for transforming the neighborhood. Nobody knew the entire project was sitting on disputed land. Then Linda made her biggest mistake. She sent me an official letter. The letter claimed that my removal of construction markers and my objections to the project represented interference with community development. It demanded that I stop harassing authorized contractors. I read the letter twice. Then I handed it to Caroline. She smiled slightly. They just created evidence for us. What do you mean? They are admitting they believe they have authority over your property. A week later, Caroline filed a formal property challenge. The news spread quickly through Cedar Ridge. Suddenly, the same neighbors who had been excited about the pool started asking questions. Some homeowners were angry. Not at me. At the HOA. They discovered that Linda had approved additional spending without explaining the legal problems surrounding the land. The pool project had already cost the association nearly $900,000, and now everyone wanted answers. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere changed completely. Linda walked in expecting applause. Instead, she faced dozens of frustrated homeowners. One resident stood up. Did you know the pool was built on disputed property? Linda remained calm. These accusations are ridiculous. Another homeowner held up paperwork. Then why does the county show different boundaries? Linda looked uncomfortable for the first time. This is a temporary legal matter. But it wasn't temporary anymore. Because during the meeting, Caroline presented a discovery request that revealed something nobody expected. Hidden inside the HOA's project files was an email chain between Linda and the construction developer. The email showed that concerns about the property boundary had been raised before construction began. A developer had warned, the southern section may not belong to the association. Confirm ownership before proceeding. Linda's response came 2 days later. Move forward. The homeowner will not stop the project. When I saw that message, I realized this was never an accident. Linda knew there was a possibility the land wasn't hers. She built anyway. She gambled that I would give up. But she underestimated one thing. Morrison Farm had survived for generations because my family knew the value of standing their ground. Now Linda Barrett was about to learn the same lesson. The pool she built to make herself look powerful had become the evidence that would bring everything crashing down. The discovery of Linda Barrett's emails changed everything. Before that moment, some people in Cedar Ridge still believed this was simply a property disagreement between a stubborn homeowner and an ambitious HOA president. After those emails became public, nobody could pretend anymore. Linda hadn't made a simple mistake. She had been warned. She had ignored the warning. And she had continued building anyway. Within days, the county opened a formal review of the pool construction permits. Inspectors examined the property boundaries, reviewed the submitted documents, and compared them against decades of official records. The results were exactly what we expected. The pool complex was partially built on Morrison Farm. The recreation area was not legally located where the HOA claimed. The construction approval had been based on inaccurate information. Suddenly, the same people who had celebrated Linda's visionary project started demanding answers. Homeowners discovered that the HOA had taken out additional loans to complete the pool. Monthly fees had increased. Several planned community improvements had been delayed because so much money had been spent on the recreation center. The dream facility that was supposed to make Cedar Ridge more valuable had become the biggest financial problem the neighborhood had ever faced. Linda tried to fight back. She hired another attorney and released a statement claiming the HOA had acted in good faith. She argued that everyone involved relied on professional documents. But Caroline had one question that destroyed that defense. If everything was done correctly, why did Linda Barrett ignore the warning email before construction began? There was no good answer. The case moved quickly after that. During the legal proceedings, several important facts came out. The original property deed was valid. The county records were accurate. The Morrison Farm boundary had never changed. The HOA's private survey had incorrectly included my land. And most importantly, the emails proved that Linda had knowledge of the potential problem before approving construction. The judge didn't view the situation as a simple disagreement. The ruling was clear. The HOA had no legal right to build on Morrison Farm. They were ordered to compensate for damages, cover legal costs, and negotiate a solution for the unauthorized construction. For Linda, the consequences were immediate. She resigned from her position as HOA president before the next community election. Several board members also stepped down after homeowners questioned their involvement in approving the project. But the biggest question remained: what would happen to the pool? The court gave the HOA two options. They could remove the structures built on my property and restore the land, or they could negotiate a legal agreement with me. At first, many people assumed I would demand the pool be destroyed. After everything Linda had done, they expected me to want revenge. But that was never my goal. I didn't want to ruin my neighbors' lives. I wanted the truth recognized. After several meetings, we reached an agreement. The HOA purchased a small section of land needed to keep the recreation center operating. They paid a fair market value for the property. They covered restoration costs for the areas damaged during construction. And they agreed to establish new rules requiring independent property verification before future projects could begin. The pool stayed, but it no longer represented Linda Barrett's victory. It became a reminder of what happens when people ignore boundaries, both legal and personal. There was one final thing I decided to do. A few months after everything was settled, I installed a small wooden sign near the edge of Morrison Farm. It didn't insult anyone. It didn't mention Linda. It simply displayed the original property name my grandfather used decades earlier, Morrison Farm. Established 1948, some people asked why I didn't celebrate defeating the HOA. The truth was, I didn't see it as defeating anyone. The real victory was proving that records, laws, and ownership still mattered, even when someone with money and influence tried to push them aside. Months later, I attended a Cedar Ridge community meeting for the first time. Not because I wanted to join the HOA, because the new board invited me to speak about the importance of checking property boundaries before starting major projects. Many of the same neighbors who once watched that pool being built now apologized. They admitted they had believed Linda because they trusted her confidence. They never questioned whether her promises were actually legal. And that was the biggest lesson from the entire situation. A person can build the biggest pool, the tallest fence, or the most impressive project in the neighborhood. But none of that changes reality. A document doesn't become true just because someone wants it to be. A boundary doesn't disappear because someone draws a new line on a map. And property rights don't vanish because someone believes they are more powerful than the person standing in their way. Linda Barrett wanted Cedar Ridge to have the most impressive community pool in the county. Instead, she created the most expensive reminder that arrogance has consequences. As for me, I still wake up every morning on Morrison Farm. I still feed the cattle. I still repair old equipment. And I still walk past that pool at the edge of my property. The difference is, now everyone knows exactly where the line is. And nobody will ever cross it again.